You can forget a lot of things, Foster Care Nation, but never forget this. You're listening to Unparalleled Studios.
I sing now.
Foster Care Nation, listen up. This is
Foster Care and Unparalleled Journey.
Strength for the powerless, courage for the fearful, hope and healing for wounded hearts. Hello and welcome back to Foster Care, an Unparalleled Journey with Jason and no Amanda. Sorry guys, but she was on the last recording we just finished up and now she's running off to go run errands. So it's just me, and I have an author for you here to listen to today, so you don't have to just listen to me. Fiona Myles has a book called This Is Me. Fiona, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you.
All right. Now, This Is Me. I assume that this has got something to do with the foster care system, the adoption system, and you have some connection in there. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you're connected with this system?
Yeah, the book is This Is Me, I'm Adopted, because I was adopted as a child. So I was adopted when I was 8 months old. I had been given up straight away from birth. My natural parent didn't want me. So I had spent a few weeks in hospital and then went to various foster places. And then my mum and dad came and chose me. And I was adopted at 8 months old, or around 8 months old.
Okay, so we can tell that you are definitely not from the deep south of America. I don't hear New York in there. I'm trying to place that accent somewhere in the States, and I don't think that's what I'm hearing. So should I just go ahead and assume that you maybe weren't in the American foster system or adoption system?
Well, no, actually, I am Scottish, and I live in Manchester in England. So I'm part of the British adoption system.
Oh, wow. So we went straight up international on this one call. We're talking in America, you're in Britain or in England, and you're from Scotland. Wow. That's a whole lot of pieces there, huh? Maybe that's why I couldn't figure out your accent exactly. I don't know. We'll blame it on that. Yeah. Us Americans are terrible at that. So I will just go ahead and jump right in. You were adopted at 8 months old. So did you know that as a child was that a part of your regular conversation?
Yeah. From about the age of 6, I remember being told by my mother that I was chosen and special and adopted. So it's kind of like those sort of 3 words were always in the same sentence for me. You know, you're chosen, you're special, you're adopted. And I kind of didn't really understand what she was talking about. You know, I kind of figured out, yeah, okay, so I'm not quite the same as my brothers and sisters then, you know, because I don't hear you calling them special and chosen or adopted, you know. So, yeah, I do remember around 6-year-old, that was the first time I was told. And then, you know, as I've gone on, it just kept being repeated, you know, until it kind of sunk in. And then when it did sink in, that's when, you know, I really sort of rebelled against it because I didn't like it. I didn't want to be adopted. You know, I thought I didn't understand, you know, why was I taken from where I should have been and all the rest of it. I think it's very difficult to just tell a child, you know, these things without any sort of intervention or any support or whatever. So, you know, and you're as a kid, you're just expected to understand and be, you know, okay with it.
Okay, well, I'm just going to say that my mama raised me right, and I know not to make any assumptions because it makes this out of this and that, as she would always say. And and I also know that you look like you were 8 months more than a couple years ago. So when you were first at that age where you were hearing that, I'm assuming that time frame was probably not a time frame where they talked about adoption very openly and maybe not even kindly.
No, it was definitely a time when it wasn't sort of spoken about, and no one else I didn't know anybody else that was adopted. And it wasn't something that was spoken about. And I wasn't kind of encouraged to tell anybody else either, really, and yeah, I mean, when I was 6, and I remember being told that, I'm going back 50 years. So there wasn't the support and network and stuff that we have now. And also living in Scotland in a very small village, there was no social workers involved. I don't think my mum and dad probably even knew that social workers could be involved, because they never asked for any to become involved, even when things got a little bit tense and whatever, with the way I was not managing the information.
Okay, yeah, because they handled stuff differently in different places and different times. And so in the U.S., if you tried to say that today, people would lose their mind if you tried to have an adoption that did not have a social worker involved. We'd probably have social workers involved to call and tell you that you're doing this horrible thing, and it would be really bad. So that's a whole different paradigm that the people in that time frame were working with, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. So as you got old enough to have to start dealing with some of these thoughts, was that something that you were ashamed about, or was it just a part of your life that was accepted, both in your own mind and in the community you were around, your friend group?
Well, as fact for me, I didn't. I felt awful being adopted. I just felt awful that I had been removed from my real family. In inverted commas, I suppose. And I couldn't understand why would that have happened, and even though my parents, tried to explain that, that my natural parent couldn't keep me and different things. But one of the sort of difficulties that I had as well was that they seemed to have this information that my older sister had been kept and I had been adopted out. And that as well kind of created its own difficulties in my mind, because then all I'm thinking about is, okay, so what was so wrong with me, that the older sister was kept and I was kind of, chucked into foster care or wherever it was in the beginning. So there was a lot for me to kind of try and, lock in. And I was in between 2 natural siblings. I had an older brother and a younger sister who were my mum and dad's own children. So I was in the middle of them. So again, that kind of didn't make for an idyllic situation for an adoptee.
Yeah, that middle child syndrome steps in again. I'm a middle kid, so I understand some of the middle child syndrome, but you touched on something there, the way that affected your ability to understand if you were really good enough. Why am I not good enough that my natural parents didn't want to keep me? What's wrong with me? Is that a thought process you dealt with, or am I just coming up with wrong ideas here?
No, that was definitely something that was a huge factor all the way through, like my childhood, my teens, early adulthood. What exactly was wrong with me? What is wrong with me? Because I just couldn't seem to manage, my emotions. I couldn't manage my, to keep myself from being angry all the time. So I grew up a very angry, troubled child, became a very troubled, angry teenager, went off into the wide world and ended up on drugs, drinking alcohol, getting into the most awful situations, where anything could have happened to me, all in this sort of search of trying to work out what is wrong with me, because growing up, my behaviour was pretty bad because I couldn't deal with what was going on. But I was just put down as naughty child, don't be so bad. Why can't you be like your brother and sister? And, and things like that. Well, obviously, I can't be like them because I'm adopted. But anyway, this was always kind of thrown out, as a kind of, why can't you be like them? And that it just compounded that feeling of not being like anybody and, being different and being rejected and not wanted. And, for me, I kind of had this constant failure thing going on. I failed as a baby even to be able to be kept by this woman that gave birth to me, and then failed as an adoptee because I was not good like my brother and sister, and stuff like that. So this sort of trail of failure and, emotional craziness just kind of, it was just with me all the time.
I can only imagine just how much that resonates in a lot of people's world, because they feel that way from one reason or another. But for a kid like you who was in the situation you were in, it only makes sense that that's part of it. Although as a kid, you don't realize that makes sense, that you're struggling with that. What age did you start reaching into the drugs and alcohol that really caused you the problems? Hey there, Foster Care Nation. We'd like to take a quick minute to step out of the podcast here and ask you guys for a little bit of support. If you could share an episode with people, friends, in a group, with family, anywhere where there's somebody who would like to hear this. Also, if you'd like to join us and support our mission, a couple dollars a month would be really helpful. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/fostercarenation. Now back to the show. What age did you start reaching into the drugs and alcohol that really caused you the problems?
Probably started taking drugs about 16.
Here in the States, we might call that a late bloomer. I hate to say that now, but it's true. I know that some of my kids have told stories after they left school. I've got a couple older kids who talk about, the drug trade inside of their middle school now. And middle school is what starts at 6th grade. So we're talking like 12, 13 years old. And we see that starting there. So I guess that's a good thing that it happened a little bit later for you, because let's be honest, no 12 or 13-year-old is well served by drugs and or alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what did that look like for you when you got into were you, was it alcohol the kind of the gateway into the other stuff? Were you into the hard drugs, or did you just, were you one of the kids who played around with like marijuana and some beer?
Yeah. I think for me, it was alcohol in the beginning. And then with the alcohol, it was smoking weed, and then kind of moved on into taking speed, LSD, because obviously I'm a lot older. So LSD, in the sort of early 80s was the thing, with the hash and the speed and whatever. And thankfully, I didn't go down the route of heroin use, which, is pretty prevalent now. So it was just like a mixture of those, just on a sort of daily basis, just keeping myself ticking over with one thing or another, one to go up, one to come down, one to go up, one to come down.
Wow. I can't even imagine what that does to the mind of a 16-year-old, because I was 16 once, and I remember that 16-year-old Jason. He wasn't a very smart guy. He wasn't good at handling a whole lot of emotional stuff either at that age. I can't imagine that didn't make that super difficult for you.
Mm-hmm. I mean, at the end of the day, for me, getting into that kind of lifestyle, it sort of numbed whatever was going on, because within that sort of set of circumstances, I got involved with a lot of really crazy people. So a lot of very difficult things happened to me. I ended up being prostituted out of a house, at 17, just gullible. I'm from the countryside in Scotland, and I had now gone down to London and England, where, it was a whole different world, really, for someone like myself coming from a small sort of village in Scotland. So, and then I ended up getting involved with people that were, selling drugs, and just got into some really difficult situations. Some pretty bad stuff happened to me, which, again, taking drugs and alcohol helped me to just not have to actually deal with it, because I still had to deal with the other stuff, the adopted stuff, the failure stuff, the rejection stuff, and all the rest of it, so yeah.
That failure part that you mentioned, I mean, who among us hasn't felt that at some point? But at that age and those level of issues, you mentioned that you were using it to numb. And oh man, that's something that is so prevalent in today's society. We see so many people who use drugs and or alcohol to just numb the emotions. Where did you find the strength to step out of that, or to get through the emotional regulation issues to where you didn't need to use chemical substances to be able to feel appropriately, I guess would be the right way to put it?
To get the way I found the strength to come out of that was I actually became a Christian. Just through a set of circumstances, I met somebody who invited me along to a church, in which I kind of didn't really want to go to, because I kind of thought, I was of the belief that maybe somebody like me wouldn't be able to set foot in a church. Why would anybody like me be allowed to be in that kind of environment? But I soon found out that it was the best thing that I ever did. I went along because I thought I was at rock bottom. I was like, where else can I go? What else can I do? I've got nothing to lose by giving this a try, and just going along and seeing what it's all about. And so I made that choice to become a Christian, and the journey, from there, that was about 29. But the journey from there to here was still long. I can't say I had this moment, a flash of light and all that, and everything was wonderful, because that isn't how it happened. But I definitely had a moment where I knew that things were going to change, and a bit of balance began to take place.
You said that happened at 29 years old?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so I have to ask that about that whole space between the 16-year-old Fiona and the 29-year-old Fiona. What did that look like, and what was your rock bottom that made you decide, I need to do different?
It was utter chaos. It was just one thing after another. I did find my natural family when I was about 21, 22, and thinking that would be the answer to, so many wrongs or things that I didn't understand. And it was nice to find them. It was nice to meet people who looked like me. It was nice to find out that I had sisters who were, had a similar personality to me. But at the end of the day, after spending some time with them, I realised that I was kind of the cuckoo in that nest as well, because they'd all been brought up together and they all knew each other inside out, and whatever. And it kind of made that sort of tilt for me, where I knew I was the cuckoo in that nest, and I always thought I was the cuckoo in the nest I'd been brought up in. But it tilted me into that place of, well, actually, the nest I was brought up in, that is my nest, if that makes sense. That's what it did for me anyway. So I from about 22, 23, I was still in that place, of taking drugs, drinking and whatever. And I began to take seizures and stuff like that. And things started to medically not be good, just because I'd been constantly doing this for so long. And I'd been in some pretty violent situations, and, there was a lot of things going on. And so it was basically, I'd gone into the hospital. It's called the infirmary in Scotland, the hospital, and they had said, if you don't stop this, you might not come out of the next seizure you have. So there was a moment where I was like, okay, this is really serious. I need to think about what I'm doing here and why I'm doing it,
God has a way of getting a hold of us, doesn't he?
Definitely.
For me, it's been, I've had my own medical struggles, and I found out at one point, a few years ago, that, the doctor looked at an MRI of my brain and said, you have several strokes. I went, huh?
Oh.
Yeah. And so fortunately, I've been super fortunate that they haven't really affected me in the long term negatively, but I have to figure out what to do with that. And so it sounds like, maybe God was trying to get a hold of you and turn you around. I like this, to ask people this question though. Have you figured out why God put you on the earth right now? Like what your job is?
What my job is right now? Yeah, I mean, basically for me right now, getting my story written and into, it's over 2 books, because one book is it's all the stuff, that I kind of brushed over a bit. It's all the stuff, and how I came to know Christ, and how I wasn't a great Christian either. I've been quite honest about the mistakes I made, coming into the world of Christ and Christians and whatever. And then, like, the second book kind of focuses on more on, the feelings of being adopted, and then I also have I've gone through 33 years of infertility. I always wanted to make my own nest, and that never happened. I wasn't ever able to have a baby. And then this is going to sound a bit strange, but God spoke to me when I was in my 40s, and he told me I would have a child at 50. And I was a bit kind of like, can you not make it a little sooner? 50 is quite old to start all that, But what he did was he had already, pre-planned and got everything ready for my little girl to be born, to my nephew from the family I was adopted out of. So it's a very unusual situation that we have here, but I now have sole care with my husband of my little girl Georgie, and she came to us 6 weeks before I was 51. So what God told me came to pass, and I even stood up in my church when I was told this by God, and told the whole church, which was a big church, that this is what had been said, and everybody knew my story of not being able to have children. So it was a big thing for me to get up and say that, but I just knew that it was going to come to pass. I didn't know how it was going to come to pass. And never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that God would have given me a child from my own bloodline. It was just incredible.
Yeah, I'm just going to draw a couple parallels there. Forgive my lack of memory. Was that Abraham and Sarah? Wasn't that kind of their story?
Yeah, well, yeah, she waited a long time. Yeah, she was in her 90s, I think.
And I'm just going to say God has a sense of humor, because if you told me I had to start raising a newborn at 90, like I am in my 40s and it's a struggle now. 90, I want to be asleep by then. I have a long nap planned at that age.
Yeah.
Faith is a component for a lot of people in this journey. And I know plenty of people it's not. And I hope nobody just tunes out and assumes that this is, all some sort of story that they don't need to hear. But man, finding that faith, that thing to believe in, that the real true north, and understanding that, what your purpose in life is. I believe that God has a plan. He's put us all here for a reason. And I also believe that most of us aren't going to know what that reason is until after we've already started our journey.
Mm-hmm.
That's so. How old is your little girl now?
She's 6 now. Yeah, she's 6.5. So she's she's a fireball. She's an incredible bringer of joy to so many people. She has special needs. She has complex needs. She was born addicted to every drug and alcohol you can think of, and she had a brain hemorrhage during her withdrawals. So that's brought about, its own difficulties for her. But where she may not be able to read or write or do some of the things that kids should be able to do at 6, she has this amazing personality where she's not shy. Everybody is just, for smiling at or talking to. So she brings a lot of joy, especially in our neighbourhood where there's a lot of elderly people. Everybody knows our little Georgie.
That's awesome, because man, sometimes we forget, we've got a little one staying with us right now, and Amanda, my wife, and I, we've discussed a number of times whether or not we would be open to adopting any more kids, because currently I have 7 that I own, and that's a lot. That is a lot for anybody. And then I meet these people with more, and I think y'all are crazy. But I look at it and go, okay, with the age I'm at, if we were to adopt a newborn baby today, I would be well into my 60s by the time she graduates high school. And I don't know, maybe I'm just being a little selfish here, but I'm thinking somewhere around retirement age, I'm going to want to relax, take a nap more than you would get to do if you had a teenage kid at home, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's been something that has made me a little bit concerned about that idea of bringing another kid in. And sometimes I hear God laughing at me and just giggling on the side. I think he has plenty of other plans for me that I don't know about yet. But until then, we'll just sit here and try and pretend like we know what's going on. But that's something that actually a friend of mine and I were discussing the other day, is the idea of grandparents raising kids, or grandparents raising their children, which this obviously isn't your grandchild, but it's in the same generation. What kind of struggles does that present for you?
I think it in a way, one of the struggles I had when she did start to go into school, I was very aware that the other parents were all young, and younger. And so it was assumed quite a lot that, when I was bringing the child to school, that I was the granny, so I had to kind of correct people quite often when we say to Georgie, "Oh, is this your granny?" And Georgie would be very offended, and say in a big loud voice, "No, that's my mummy," so it was kind of like awkward moment. But, I think now that she's getting older and people around, they know us now, so it's not as awkward as it was, in the beginning. But I do consider the fact that as, obviously as she's getting older, we're getting older. And, I do think to myself, I would love to just see her safely into adulthood, because she does have problems and issues and whatever. So I'd like to, be given enough years to just see her in adulthood and make sure that she's, going to be cared for, as an adult. So that would be great if that was.
Yes. That's another one of the thoughts that I've had with even some of our other kids. It's just because I've had some health struggles, and I look at it and go, man, hopefully if this is God's plan. I know He's got an answer for the end, and I know that I don't necessarily get to know it. I don't get to know what those plans are, there's an old song that I mentioned a lot of times because I love the line that says, "If you want to hear God laugh, just tell Him your plans."
Yeah, absolutely.
I think He has a good giggle now and then when He hears me thinking, because my plans are never the ones that work out in the long run. But that's, that struggle for understanding what it's like to raise a kid in today's world. It's been a few years since you or I was a kid, but we didn't have to deal with like the struggles of social media.
Yeah, that's true. That's something that it is a concern. I think it's maybe less of a concern for me with my child because of the needs that she has. She kind of just looks at things on YouTube and she just loops the same thing over, and it's rare that she moves, onto something else. We kind of have to move in and say, right, that's going to fry your head if you watch it again. So she's not really into girly stuff yet or anything, whereas a lot of young, even at her age, little kids are in getting their nails done and all the rest of it, whereas she's not really interested in all that. I'm sure it'll come, but I think I'm blessed that it's going to be a bit later, down the line for her.
Yeah, count your blessings there.
Yeah.
But yeah, we deal with things with kids in a whole different generation who grew up in a whole different world. I mean, things like if you grew up in a rural town in Scotland, your experience versus hers, like we've had this whole, we're just going to call it a generational trauma, if you will, that we've spent an entire lifetime for some of these kids living with this boogeyman out there, whether it was Osama bin Laden or Saddam Hussein or whoever the current one is. There's all these huge things that we all know about now because it's not just on the 5 o'clock news for 30 or 60 minutes. It's on social media. It's everywhere. And my 14-year-old daughter comes home and she talks about some of the stuff where these kids in high school are all think they're experts on politics. And they're having these discussions about stuff that they don't truly understand. But a lot of it is this fear stuff. Right now as we record this, we're kind of in the middle of this Ukrainian-Russian conflict going on over there. And everybody's afraid of World War III breaking out. And my gosh, to hand that to these kids and expect them not to have some special level of anxiety and concern is just silly to realize that, if you don't realize that they're
Yeah.
going to be struggling from that. Does she see a lot of that stuff in the world going on? Does that bother her? Hey there, Foster Care Nation. If you'd like to find yourself in a group with like-minded people, head over to Facebook, and you can find us at facebook.com/groups/fostercareuj. We've got a group over there where we talk about foster care, we talk about adoption, and we talk about all the things related. If your podcast player allows it, you can also reach down and hit that subscribe button so you get notified every week when we put up uploads. Every Tuesday, a new episode comes out. We'd love to see you next week. Now back to the show. If you don't realize that they're going to be struggling from that, does she see a lot of that stuff in the world going on? Does that bother her?
Strangely enough, this evening, she doesn't normally see much of the news, but our schedule on the television has changed, and she came through where there would normally be something, kiddie on, but the news was on, and she was seeing these people fleeing, from Ukraine, and she was kind of like, what's happening there? Why are they running? Who are they running away from? So I was trying to explain to her, because I kind of feel very much that there's no point in sugarcoating something, so I was trying to explain to her that it's something called a war, where two people are fighting, and it's causing all these people to have to move away, and things like that. So she was kind of like, okay then, but it was boring, so she just left the room. But so she doesn't, thankfully, have too much of but I'm ready for her if she comes back with any sort of questions,
Oh yeah, you have to be, because they'll be back with questions. They always are.
Yeah.
So now you have a book, This Is Me, I'm Adopted. So can you tell us a little bit about your book and where that came from and what it's about?
Well, basically, the books are my story, and the reason I wrote the second one as a second book, because I could have lumped it all in one book, but I felt like there was two sides, two parts, whereas the second part, This Is Me, I'm Adopted, it contains the sort of emotional side of being adopted, and some of the ridiculous things that people say to adopted kids, and stuff like that maybe they don't understand, are not nice. And, thinking back, obviously my story is 60s, 70s when I was a child. So, people don't even speak like that anymore. Well, I hope not anyway. But so some of those little things are in there as catalytic moments where something was said that just, compounded those feelings of being different, not part of the family, and other people not seeing me as part of the family, but as something else, and it's unfortunate that people, did say things like that they said, but that's just, people were more or were less educated, I suppose, then. So the reasoning behind the books as well is that I want people to read them and be able to, identify with the honesty in them and identify with the feelings that are in them, and also to be, hopefully given, an element of hope, when I talk about my faith, which my faith is discussed in both books, in a fairly light-hearted way, but an honest way as well. And, one of the things that I'm doing now with the books is I'm sending them free into prisons and taking them free to, women's groups where they're, where they're domestic abuse or things like that, because I really feel that, it's not about making money off them. It's about getting the hope and the story out there. So, my heart, I've kind of stopped promoting them as such all over my social medias and whatever. I'm now just kind of, whenever I get some money, I'm just pouring them into the prisons and into groups and stuff like that. I'd rather give them away to someone who doesn't know God, and someone who really needs to hear that there's people out there that have been through the stuff you've been through, and they've made it, into a better place, a more balanced life. I have a good relationship. I've been married nearly 20 years, whereas, before all that, there was loads of totally chaotic relationships and plenty of them, So, it's just to give a bit of hope out there.
I don't know if there's many more callings that's more important than giving hope to the hopeless in this life. And it sounds like that's what you've been called to do, because, I don't know about anywhere overseas. I know that here in the States, I've met a guy I talked to who was I believe he worked as a guard in a prison somewhere. And one of the things that he had mentioned was, as he met these guys who were there, the overwhelming majority of the men who were in the prison he was working in were all former foster youth.
Wow.
And the fact that so many kids come through that foster and adoptive situation and then don't end up with a solid family connection as they grow out of that, and how that affects their life and aging out of the system, and how many of those kids end up homeless, addicted to some sort of substance, and eventually in the criminal justice system as well. So the fact that you're reaching there, I think, is incredibly powerful. Your target audience is waiting for your story.
Yeah, and that's my aim, is to get as many out there into the prisons, so that to make a difference, really. That's what I believe, that God called me to write the stories, because I wrote them both within a year, and had them, published and out there within a year, both of them. And I just believe that God gave me the time in the pandemic, because I couldn't go out to work. I was stuck at home. My child was allowed to go to school because she's vulnerable, she has special needs. So she was out of the house, and I was in the house for a change. And I was like, oh, okay, I've been given this time. I'm not just going to sit here and waste it, And that's when I just believe I was called to get the stories written, the books done, and out there.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I probably would have used it for a nap time.
I'm not a napper.
Well, with all the things we have going on, I'm a napper whenever possible, which is maybe once in a blue moon. That's about it. That's all I get for naps. But I wish I could be. So, your story has tells a whole lot of that, of your history. I'm curious, as you became an adult and as you moved out into a more mature human being who started to understand all these things, do you still have a connection with your adoptive family?
Yeah. Do you mean the family I was brought up with?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, unfortunately, my mum and dad are both dead, but my brother and sister were very close. My sister in particular, I think, sisters are closer, I think, than sisters and brothers, but maybe that's just our family. But, my sister and I are very, very close. My brother and I, we're close, but it's not an everyday thing, and, aunts and uncles, whatever. Yeah, because like I said, I realised that, I was the cuckoo in the nest from the biological family, which kind of tilted me back into well, actually, that is your nest, that's where you have been nurtured, fed, brought up, regardless of whether you liked it or not, that is your nest, and as for the biological family, the biological mum, she died as well in 2005. And the sisters and brothers that I have there, I have a kind of a polite relationship with, the odd message now and again. And I've only just actually discovered through the DNA ancestry thing who my biological father might be. So that's a little new track I'm on at the moment. So that's it. I've tracked down what I think is a half sister, and we've spoken on this video kind of chat thing, and she's very willingly said she'll do a DNA as well, so that to make that connection, a reality, because it's possible that it's another brother, or that may have been the father. So
okay, yeah, because I'll be honest, it's possible that we might be related, because I did the DNA thing and they circled all of Europe and they're like, yeah, you're from there, like 5%, 10% from all of them, but I'm from somewhere over there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So God only knows what connection may or may not exist there, but that's a cool thing that nowadays that they have, is that DNA thing, the DNA connection. Now, your daughter, you know who her biological family is, right? It's part of your family. So
Yes.
how does that connection work? Is that something that you're able to keep open, or is that something that needs some borders around it?
No, it's really it's quite healthy at the moment. It's, she has a fantastic relationship with her nana, who is her biological mum's mum. So she's fantastic, and she and there's not a lot of people can manage Georgie, because she does have her own ways and whatever. But Nana's been fantastic at, working alongside us and wanting to know exactly how do we manage her, so that she can do the same thing to keep her on an even keel. And her other Nana, she has sporadic contact, which is fine. That, whatever. Her natural mum unfortunately died in 2020. She'd been in prison, and we'd had great contact when she was in prison, and I was able to send her lots of letters in prison and photos, and we were going to be doing some one-to-one contact so that Georgie could meet her and get to know her. Like, Georgie's got pictures all over her bedroom wall of her natural family as well, so that she's, educated as to who they all are. But unfortunately, Mum came out of prison and went back on the drugs and had a heart failure and died. So I just kind of got Georgie around to the fact that she was going to meet her mum. And then I had to tell Georgie that Mummy had died. So that was really, really difficult. It's difficult for us. It was difficult for Georgie. It was difficult all round. So, yeah, she's been through a lot, this little girl, but she's brilliant.
It's amazing what these kids can rebound from. And, lest we put too much emphasis on the resilience of kids. I mean, today's generations of kids have had more traumas that they've had to deal with. And it's really sad to see. And a lot of it is focused around a drug addiction. That's where I see a lot of grandparents raising their children. I mean, or their grandchildren. My stepmom has had a hand in a lot of her children's. I have a double half step nephew. I don't know what you would call him exactly. He was my stepsister's son, and then my stepmom and my dad ended up raising him. She ended up passing away from a nasty genetic disease, and so they raised him, and so he called my stepmom mom, although it was his grandma, and it got really confusing. I just call him Timmy. I just called him Timmy. It was easier that way. And so yeah, but she has another daughter who's had a lot of struggles with addiction in her life as well, and she's had a big hand in helping to raise her kids as well. And that's just something that is almost at pandemic level here in the States, with grandparents thinking they were done raising their kids and then finding out, you're not done.
Oh, yeah.
Is that something that you see over there a whole lot in Europe? You see a lot of that going on today?
Yeah, there is. There's a lot of it, and we have something over here called special guardianship, and that's where you would go to court, and so that you get the parental rights, so that the mum and dad can't just come and take the children. But yeah, I mean, Georgie's nana, she has, I think, raised 3 or 4 other children, from another daughter of hers that unfortunately, wasn't able to bring her own children up. So she's one of those grandparents that have done that.
Wow. Yeah, I think there's probably something in that I need to do some research on, and maybe even figure out a series on that, because it's such a big thing. And I guess my selfishness looks at it and goes, right now I'm looking going, another little one, like, that's a lot for me. But I'm barely to the age where I could have grandchildren yet. I don't have any. None of our children have had any kids yet. But I'm at that point where I have to question whether or not I'm too selfish to do that. Because let's be honest, I'm tired. We're working on 7 kids, and I've got a ways to go. Our youngest is 6 years old, and so as you think through that thought, I look at people like you, and I'm like, wow. that is an intense level of bravery to step in at 50 years old and say, yep, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take care of that. So, I mean, number one, it tells us that you care about people, right? You have a deep level of care in your life. And man, I can appreciate that a lot because we don't have a lot of those folks. But tell me, what was it, did you struggle with making that decision, or was that just a really simple yes for you?
It was a simple yes, because I knew that I had that word, and I knew that God had told me I would have a child at 50. And so because I had no idea that this little girl had even been born, it was almost like this fluke thing that happened that brought me back into contact with my sister. She became a Christian. She was getting baptized. So another sister thought that because she knew I was a Christian, I would want to come to her baptism. And so she told me that, my sister had become a Christian and was getting baptized. So I turned up as a surprise, because I live in England, they live in Scotland. And I turned up as a surprise at the baptism, having not really had much contact with them on any sort of real intimate level, to find things like that out. And that's when I stayed overnight, and she started to tell me about this little girl that was going to be, off. She was already, she'd been in foster care from the moment she got out of the hospital. And she was going to be, she needed a forever family. So we kind of thought that we wouldn't get her because I'm not legally her kin, if you know what I mean, because I was illegally adopted out of that family. So it was a bit of a journey to kind of go through social services and explain the connection, and would we legally be allowed to have, this child. And we had to go through such a huge process of, interviews and the whole background checks. And obviously with my background, it's, there's criminal records there. My husband, he was a heroin addict as well. Before I met him, but he had a lot of criminal activity on his, and we kind of thought, oh gosh, we're not going to pass all these things that we have to pass because of our backgrounds, and then we were very honest with the whole system, and they appreciated our honesty and felt that because of where Georgie was coming from addicted parents, we would be able to talk to her about that and about why you become an addict and whatever, and how some people can come out of it and some people maybe can't. They kind of felt that was a bonus, for this particular child to come into our lives, and then just as we were getting towards the end of the process, my husband got cancer. He was diagnosed with cancer, and he had chemotherapy and surgery. He's completely clear now. But again, that was a bit of a shock. We were like, oh no, can we take on a child with, because immediately you get that word said to you, you think that's it, it's all over. But his prognosis was really good. So again, they were fine to continue with the process. It's I can't say it's been easy, because we knew that Georgie was going to have difficulties, but the extent of the difficulties, we weren't entirely sure. Neither was anybody else, because with the brain bleed, it was, well, what is actually, how is it going to affect her? But so it's been a difficult journey, but it's just been so worth it, because she's still in the family. Her identity is well-rounded. Yes, she's adopted, she's with us, but she has contact with her natural family, which is, it's one of the things that, part of some of the things I do with MPs, our government system here, is I'm trying to work on getting some kind of bill through where, if there is no danger from grandparents and whatever, why are adopted people, can they not just have a little, clause in the adoption thing where if Nana is a safe person, then, why should Nana suffer, because of the daughter or the son or whatever? It's just a little thing of mine that I just feel it would help any adoptee to have some kind of connection.
Well, I'm curious because, Amanda and I have our own journey through all the kids and all the things we've walked through. What was that? What was it with your husband's involvement in this? Like, was it something that he was right on board with you, or because I'm going to assume he's probably not in his 20s anymore, so, I mean, I don't know, maybe you snagged a real young one, but
I did actually. He's a bit younger. He's 43. So yeah, I do have a younger husband.
Yeah, but even at that age, to be willing to take on a kid that's not his biological kin, what was that like for him and the conversations you guys had around that?
Yeah, I mean, he because we had that word and whatever, and he kind of believed as well that this child was the child that we were going to have, regardless of that. He was a little concerned about the difficulties that she might have. I am kind of someone, I've worked with adults and children with difficulties, so it wasn't going to be a shock to me. Whereas for him, he was a little more guarded as to would we manage because we were told that she would never walk. But whereas she runs rings around everybody, she can walk perfectly well. But so there was those kind of little things. But at the back of it all, both him and I, we both knew that she was our child. She was the child that God had promised us. So we just went full steam ahead, really, to make this home her home, so that she could remain as part of her own family.
Wow. Yeah. As it turns out, it comes down to those plans. God's plans are not always ours, right? And sometimes you just have to forget what the experts say, and they tell you that this will never work. It'll never happen. And you find out that they're wrong usually,
Yeah.
So I am kind of curious about this, because here in the States, I live in Missouri, and we had a little girl stay with us for a while, and her grandparents were over in Illinois, which is just next door. They were only 20 miles across the state line. And so in order to cross state lines, if they had lived here in Missouri, they wanted placement of the little girl, and they were, as far as I know, still are great people. And so if they had lived here in the States somewhere, they would have called us and let us know that, hey, we found a biological placement. And probably that afternoon or the next, they would have come and picked her up with her stuff and taken her over to stay with her biological grandparents, which is great. Nothing wrong with that. The problem comes in that since they lived across the state line, that involves the ICPC, which if you're in the States and in the system, you know what that means. It's interstate compact, something or other. I don't know. But basically, it's the governmental bridge that moves from one state to another. And instead of that, today or maybe tomorrow moving, it was months. It was more than 6 months before she was able to cross that state line by those 20 miles or so that they lived inside of the next state over. How difficult is that over there in Europe? Because you're dealing with, from England to Scotland. I can't imagine crossing country lines like that would be simple, or maybe it's easier than I think.
We had a few problems, we had a few problems with the legalities, because when we got Georgie from Scotland, it was called a kinship order, which, you're kin and you're taking her on. But as soon as she crossed the border, in Scotland on a kinship order, she'd be safe. The parents wouldn't be allowed to come and just take her. As soon as she crossed the border, we were then not under the kinship order because we were not in Scotland. So the parents could have come to the door and lifted the child. So we had to very quickly, which nothing in the judicial system happens quickly, we had to get a special guardianship order, which made her safe in England, which was that was a lot of court appearances and a lot of information again given, and we put in a special order to change her name, just her second name, to our name, just for school and all the things, so that everything was the same, and we were told very clearly that never happens, that just doesn't happen. But, for whatever happened on that day with the judge, she granted that, when she heard story and whatever and all the things, because the parents didn't turn up to the hearing. So, it kind of let her see that they weren't really bothered as well, So we got the change of name, which is really unusual.
Wow. Yeah. I'm just going to keep going back to that God's plans are not our plans thing, right? When he makes a decision, I don't think that people necessarily have to agree with him, but it's just going to work out in a certain way.
Yeah. He knows what he's doing, doesn't he? It's been an incredible journey.
Well, wow. Well, Fiona, I appreciate you telling your story and talking about your daughter and letting, kind of bringing that out to everybody, because these are stories that are hard to hear, hard to find sometimes. Somebody who came out of a really difficult adoption, who then turned around and did adoption right, I guess would be the way I would put it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. It means a lot to me that I'm able to keep her, in the family, and she can make her, she's not going to wonder what her identity is. She's going to know what her identity is, which means a lot to me.
So if you could say one thing to all the grandparents out there, or all the, the people of certain generations that I'm coming into, nice way of me calling myself old here, but people who are in that generation where you thought you were done raising kids and the situation comes up where it looks like you might be needed, what advice would you give to these people who are staring at this in their own family?
I would say, if you can, then just do it, because, to keep your child in the family, it really helps for the child to know where it's come from, and who it identifies with, and, all the little quirks that, we all have. We want to know where we got them from. It will mean so much to the child, to be able to be kept within the family. So if you can, and if you're able, and there is, I'm not sure about in America, but in England, there is quite a lot of support, groups and things where people can, jolly you along and help you with different things. So there is the help out there. Sometimes you do have to go and look for it, but there is help out there, and to take that help so that you can keep the child within its own environment and family.
Well, hopefully whoever's listening can find that help and join us on this mission of keeping kids safe, because just like you, I think that's one of our main goals, is finding a way to help keep kids safe who are coming out of hard and dangerous places. So I just want to thank you, Fiona, for coming in here and telling your story today, and just being open and honest with people, because these are great stories and you're a true inspiration for people who aren't too certain how they can handle the situation that they find themselves in. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Foster Care Nation, thank you for listening to Fiona's story. Now take her knowledge and wisdom to heart so you can create love and healing in your family and community. Be sure to come back next week. We have new episodes every Tuesday. If you'd like to share your story as a guest, you can reach us at jason@fostercarenation.com. You can connect with other like-minded people on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/fostercareuj. And don't forget, we have a Patreon account where you can support our mission for as little as $5 a month. It's at patreon.com/fostercarenation. The links to everything are in the show notes in your podcast player or at fostercarenation.com. And, as always,
you are so super awesome. I think you guys are cool. Yeah. Thank you for listening. Thanks.
Unparalleled Studios.